Hi, I'm Os Wintry, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today I spoke with Oleksa Lozowchuk, who is a Canadian composer who I've known for many years and has a truly fascinating story growing up in Canada, getting involved in a hyper kind of eclectic combination of musical influences before eventually making his way kind of sideways into the game industry. He worked at a studio that was part of Capcom, and he spent many years writing on the Dead Rising franchise. His stories of the music production and compositional approach to that was really amazing, genuinely inspiring. And then, of course, we end our conversation with his discussion of working on the Horizon Forbidden West franchise, on the sequel. And he's just bursting with insight and pearls of wisdom. And it was one of those conversations that I feel incredibly fired up afterward, and hope you do too. Oleksa, thanks for being here, man.
It's been a while, Austin.
I know. You know what's funny? My Facebook memories today reminded me of when you were last in LA. I assume for like the HMMAs, perhaps, but it was 1 year ago today that
Yeah,
we
that's
took a
right.
selfie in my studio, and or at least it was 1 year ago today that you shared the photo.
That's
Uh,
right. It was literally a year ago because the I remember having chicken wings right beside your studio after in the back out kind of that restaurant behind you and stuff. So
That's so funny. Yeah,
yeah.
I was. It was one of those where I don't. I'm super inconsistent with my checking of Facebook these days. So I like. There's a lot of these kind of annual memory reminders that I kind of don't see. I just don't look for like a week at a time. But I happened to look this morning, and it was this weird, you know, like seeing the present and the future and the past all at once
Yeah.
of the last time you were here.
That's actually
Uh,
kind of crazy because that means a year ago I remember you telling me about the musical stuff, but nothing was released publicly. It was like just
so, yeah, there's been a lot of that.
a
There's
lot
been
has
folks.
happened in a year, right? Like it's crazy.
I've mentioned a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of people that I told it to, and then they would be like, "Whatever happened with that?" Because I mentioned like 3 years ago. When we were still like randomly, like they just ask, "Hey, what are you doing today?" And like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm in a writing session or whatever." It just was this thing that was kind of cooking along steadily for so long. It was 5 years by the time it launched.
Congrats, by the
And
way, on the Grammy nom for that. Well
thanks,
deserved.
man.
It's
Thanks.
awesome.
And I think it occurs to me that almost certainly by the time this is public, the results of that will be known.
Right.
So either thank you or better luck next time, I guess.
Uh,
And
it's all good. It's all good.
it'll be
It's a recognition for the giant feat that you guys accomplished. So yeah,
well. That's very kind, man. It always means a lot when um like fellow travelers, as it were, colleagues in the trenches who really understand this stuff, both musically and the systems, the underlying systems, really kind of any kind words that come from a very like peer to peer sort of way always carry a lot of weight with me. It's always why every year, for example, at GDC and the Gang Awards,
yeah.
always feels very significant because it's like this is the home team. These are the people that really get it, that really do the same exact thing that I do,
Yeah.
and
No,
whose
it's cool.
work
Actually,
inspires me.
it was cool because at Game SoundCon you presented kind of. I had seen some clips and you had shared some stuff in terms of the branching and the nesting and kind of how
Mm.
complex the whole Stray Gods was, but to actually see it come to life, to actually see the response, to kind of see that like
The
even
madness.
well the madness was there and there was complexity there, but at the end of the day the kernel of the idea is what still people were excited about and that's what they responded to, and to me that's the big win. Like yeah, sure, you could have a giant rat's nest of like logic and all this kind of stuff, but at the end of the day it's like people who loved musical theater, who loved gaming, who loved this kind of stuff walked away and just like, hey, this is novel. So I think that's the big win for me.
Well, I appreciate that. That is in pretty directly the goal. Was just to say let's just try something that, as far as we can tell, no one's ever really tried.
Yeah.
I don't ever. I'm always extremely hesitant to say that we're the first to ever, because the only way to make that true is to whittle it down to this obscure, like we're the first person to ever stand on one leg while looking
Right.
north, while like you have to add so many kind of specifics to genuinely own it. And then honestly, even then, there's billions of people in the world, and like hundreds of billions historically, if you go back far enough, probably someone has tried it. But we really couldn't find any games, like especially when we were getting ready to release, we're starting to think about marketing, and you start to analyze what are the other kind of comps on the market. You know, it's kind of like if you're house hunting and you're trying to gauge the price, you look for similar size and age and upkeep and whatever comparable neighborhood and placement and all that stuff, and to try to build some sense of what to reasonably compare it with. And we really came up pretty dry. There's a few games that had musical theater-esque singing kind of built into them on some way or level, but usually it was either interstitial cutscenes or a thing that plays in tandem with gameplay, but you don't really have any actual control over in any narrative sense. It's like,
it's a different beast.
It was it was one of those where I said, I'm cautiously optimistic that we may have done something novel, but in any case, well, very kind of you, but I'm all too happy to make this conversation entirely about you. Let's start. I want to start the exact same way I did with my conversation with Gustavo Santaolalla.
Sure.
Which is, can you tutorialize for me, because I've never actually definitively felt like I had this correct. Can you tutorialize how to pronounce your last name?
Last name. Well, so depends if you want to do it like how Ukrainians say it, or
let me ask it. How do you say it, and then we can broaden it to a more historic or ethnically accurate, I guess.
So let me start with the first name, because that's what everybody actually says wrong. I've had everything from like Askelo to Xlax to Illustra, the fat soluble.
Xlax is pretty excellent.
Yeah. So. And most people actually, because there's no K before S in the English language.
Right, it looks like Oleska if you're not.
Yeah, and so everybody says Oleska, sometimes Illustra. You remember that fat replacement that they were trying to put in chips for a while?
That's so funny.
Anyways, so the first name is actually Oleksa, and now it's kind of cool because with Amazon Alexa, I just say, Amazon Alexa, just change the A to an O.
And right. That's good.
And then last name, I just say Lozowchuk. And I guess the accents would be on the Z, so on the Z, I guess.
Lozowchuk.
Yeah, but Chuck, I guess. But in Ukrainian, it would be like Lozowchuk. Basically, it's the first part, Loza, is actually my family's name. It's the root is willow, like the willow tree and stuff. So Loza, yeah. Lozowchuk.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's one of those where I probably heard you say it the very first time we met many years ago.
Right.
And then ever since then, especially these, that kind of like Polish, Slovenian, Ukrainian, Russian, the whole kind of Slavic, Eastern edge. Yeah, Slavic. Those are so like impenetrable to me as a white bread American that at some point I just realized I just think of you as Oleksa. It's like you're Oleksa L, and I thought I like to own my deficiencies as outwardly as possible on this podcast and in life. So that's good. So Lozowchuk.
Yep.
It's interesting that the big differentiator is the kind of, I guess, the westernized or like anglicized is treating the W as a W instead of like you, because you said Lozowchuk when you.
Yeah, well, Lozowchuk. It's actually Chuk. Yeah, so it's like a B in Cyrillic is like a V. So right. Lozowchuk, yeah. But I never say that. Most people are just like Alexa,
Yeah, or more Xlax.
Yeah, well, I try to avoid those. But the funniest is actually people that I've worked with for multiple years, some of them still say Oleska, and I'm like, I don't have the heart to say it sometimes.
Yeah, it's like a Seinfeld episode where you're just past the point of sort of decorum for correcting them.
Totally. It's just like, there's no point in making a big deal of it. So, but I haven't had illustrious. I was one previous employer guy who used to bug me. I worked in the communications department for a summer during like high school. And my boss was this hilarious guy, but he would just totally make fun of me all the time. And that was his nickname for me, was Illustra. So
that's too funny. Well, and the grand irony to all of that is that despite the sort of family history, I think of you as when I, when I kind of make my mental catalog of folks I know around the world, you're one of my, one of our sort of brothers to the north. So
Right.
the great sort of funny thing with all of that is that you are a Canadian uh,
I am.
fellow game industry traveler.
Hmm.
Um, so why don't we start with that and just uh, give me a kind of rundown on, because actually you must have told me, but I can't actually remember. So this is me not just teeing you up for the betterment of the audience, but actually I can't really remember what that initial spark was that got you into music. Everyone has their various flavors of that childhood moment, or
Yeah.
that concert they went to, or that movie they watched, or whatever. Where did music come into your life, and then how did that eventually pave the way to games specifically, since it's such a novel subset of music?
Sure. I grew up in a musical family. My mom was a choir director, music teacher. We have artists kind of all, actually, even going back to our family in the Carpathian Mountains in Ukraine, they were all artisans, basically.
Mm.
But yeah, I grew up, I started classical violin at the age of 3. Um, in fact, my wife and I, Kara and I, after we got married, we realized we grew up in the same city, and we realized that we were in the same Suzuki class at 3 years old.
No
We didn't
kidding.
know. So that was kind of cool.
Are
So
there any photos by chance?
no, no, but we did have we knew it because we had a recital booklet from, when we were, I guess that would have been 1979. So that's kind of crazy. So yeah, I
That is amazing.
started off with violin, did that until grade 6. I pretty much basically from when I was kind of very young, like a year or 2 years old, music was just something very innate for me. My mom would wake us up every morning turning on Pachelbel's canon, or like Slavic choral music, or like folk music from around the world, or like different stuff as a way to wake us up.
Mm.
So it was very kind of part of our world. And then, did classical violin until grade 6. But what ended up happening is my teachers got frustrated with me because I'd be playing these etudes and other stuff. And then I'd be changing the parts and making up things on the spot, and they'd get frustrated. And then I ended up kind of, there wasn't like a concert or a moment. I was so drawn to it. So we would go to live shows, and I would just stand in front of bands for hours, just soaking it in. Just like, I remember being in like, elementary school, everybody else would be noodling around doing other stuff, and I'd be drawing like album covers of what would be my future albums with lyrics. Like, it was kind of like spandex rockers and 12-piece drum kits and all that kind of stuff. But that world was very attractive to me, and it was a world that I remember staying up recording radio station feeds for songs, because I'd go to the public library and rent cassettes, basically. I remember listening to like Sig Sig Sputnik and like all these, or I remember Kiss had some albums that I would listen, Detroit Rock City and stuff like that.
Wow.
Very eclectic range.
Yeah.
I remember even when I was in grade 5, I think, or 4, my best friend and he ended up getting a Casio keyboard, and we would take pots and pans, Casio keyboard, and he had a nylon guitar, and we would detune it so we could do power chords and other stuff. And we'd just start writing songs, and we would write songs and record them on the Casio with like beats and like guitars and that kind of stuff. And eventually I had older siblings, so I would be exposed to like punk rock groups like SNFU and this kind of stuff. So then eventually that turned into like a love for more of the edgy indie kind of vibe, that just kind of progressed. And then in high school, I had a cousin who was an actress, and she wanted to do a folk pop album, and people had kind of known that I was a multi-instrumentalist. I had taught myself to play. I think from the age of 3, I started teaching myself to play piano and kind of every other instrument after that. And then it just became part of my life. It just consumed every part of my life, basically. I did sports and lots of that kind of stuff, but really when it came to high school, super into that. And then when my cousin asked me to produce her folk pop album, it was the first time I got to really dig in at a studio on a Studer 24 track, 2-inch reel to reel full. I
That's
get
a
to visit.
huge leap. I mean, that's a
Well, I had like at home, my dad, because he was the executive director of a choral federation. So they had like a set of like Sennheiser mics that they would record choirs with that I get to borrow, but I basically had it like
most of the
90%
time.
of the time.
Yeah,
Most of
right. Yeah.
and he had like some Ure reel to reel, and I had a Fostex 4-track, and I would just like sit in my room for hours and hours and hours writing songs, recording songs. So that was kind of my 10,000 hours.
Yeah, right, right. So when the cousin asks for this,
I was already at a
you would
yeah.
already kind of put your yeah, okay, that makes way more sense then, because I was going to say, good lord, to go straight into a studio and skip the kind of garage production. But I see you had already done that for
I had done that for a long
years.
time, and I had played in bands. I was in grade 9. I was the leader of a band called the Family Dog, and basically it was all a bunch of grade 12 guys, and they realized I could sing and write stuff, and so I was the front man of this band. I remember our first gig. I was in grade 9, and we were paid in bar tickets with rum and coke, and I'm basically hanging out with all these college, university people. I'm in grade 9, right? And so that was kind of my world. Was like I was
Is
advanced
that as
playing.
illegal there as it would be here?
Yeah, I mean, it was the prairies. It was in Saskatchewan and Regina, and it's kind of like
Holy crap, I've been there. That's so funny.
yeah,
That's yeah, I went to Moose Jaw and I had to fly into Regina
yeah.
and then drive for 2 hours or whatever. And that was having been through Kansas and seeing like what flat plains in America
Hmm.
was like. I said this feels like it has it beat because it really does feel like it's eternity. It's like being on the moon.
Oh,
And
literally, you go for. I remember growing up, you would drive for 8-9 hours to the next province over to Calgary, and it's literally you could just go in a straight line,
yeah,
right? And you see no mountains, and I mean a little bit, but not much. But so there was a charm growing up there because the quality of the sunshine actually was. Some people have said it's even better than some parts of Egypt because you have like 180 degrees of
right.
balancing
Like
of
the
sun
arc.
rays and
Yeah.
the arc and the quality of light. So there was a lot of great things about growing up, and actually, I think the richness and the ability to lean deeply into music in large part was because the community, as simple as it was a lot of farm communities, and the community was quite, I don't know, not pretentious, right?
Yeah, sure.
It wasn't high academia. There was academics, and there was a lot of great culture and stuff. But it was just an environment which was like there's not a whole lot else to do, and so if you find something you're passionate in, it was a great way to like dive deep into that. Anyways, coming back to the high school thing, yeah, I was in the studio. The project was a couple months. Got to bring in musicians, friends, go through the whole. I mean, this was back when we had Sample Cell, and we were like syncing like 2-inch reel to reels with like weird MIDI and all this other stuff just to get like re-triggering kick drums and
Yeah,
like
really basic clocking stuff, basically.
yeah, basic clocking stuff. But I loved it so much, and I was just like, this is what I want to do. And so then it came time to finish high school.
Was that a
And
serious that was going to be one of my questions is when that moment became I love this, it's my favorite hobby to this should be what I do with my life. It sounds like it was right at that what like age what 13, 14,
yeah,
15.
probably, yeah, exactly. And it wasn't so much that it was like, this is what I need to do for my life, as much as just this is what I do anyways.
Right.
And it was more of a when it came to like grade 12 and being like, what am I gonna do in for university? It was like, I didn't want to go to music school because I didn't want to be told what to do for music, right? And so I ended up choosing to go to film school. I did my bachelor's in filmmaking and my master's in filmmaking actually afterwards. So I had a different way to get into music, into games. I ended up basically, like I said, doing the film route. Moved to Montreal after, got married. We had a couple kids in Montreal. Stayed there, worked in the film industry for quite a few years. I was doing commissions for like choirs and orchestras and chamber groups and that kind of stuff. And then I also was doing a lot of sound design and post-production work for Inuit filmmakers. There's a company called Izuma there that did the Fast Runner at Tenarjwat that won at Cannes. And so it was kind of a cool kind of pocket that I sat in that Montreal scene, because musically I was doing stuff that I wanted to. I had a album called Bright Sadness, which I had produced there, and that was kind of my launching port into more serious writing. And this was all after 9/11, basically. And but in the professional realm, I was kind of in the film and TV world, scoring some films, TV series. I was working for a company out there also called Dasmo, and they're kind of like the major music house for all of the Quebec films, because Quebec has its own unique industry and its own cultural repository of films and all that
Like
kind of
everything.
stuff.
I mean, it's sort of two countries in one, basically.
Very much, and it's distinct from like other francophonie like countries like France or other countries that French around the world.
It's like an interesting, and from my limited experience, and I'm certainly no expert, it feels very Venn diagram where, like I have a friend who lives in Montreal who's kind of a French Canadian pop star. And so naturally she's pretty big in Canada, and most of her songs are in French. So she's most popular in Montreal and Quebec City and places like that. But she's also she could do a tour in France and actually, sell shows properly because of that overlap. Despite her, I don't think it's not like she culturally is French. It's definitely Canadian. So I find it very fascinating, because can't really think of any corollary to that anywhere in the world where there's sort of such a strong stamp on one country by another, but it's still very much two distinct places at the same time. Even Montreal doesn't feel like Paris.
No, Montreal and Montreal has its own vibe also, right? And its own kind of like offshoots of their own kind of music scene and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we were there for quite a bit. And then in 2005, just at the end of 2005, I had a friend from high school that I played on the volleyball team together with. He was a programmer at EA. He had worked on I think MVP was the baseball franchise for the MLB that they were doing. They were starting up a new studio called Blue Castle Games. He knew I was in audio, post-production and stuff like that. And he also knew that I had a kind of life in music and composition and scoring for film and TV. And he was like, I was doing a commission for the Vancouver Symphony for the Olympics at the time, and I was going to be coming out to Vancouver. He's like, we're starting a new studio. We have no audio person. You should probably apply and come out and do an interview. And anyways, I applied, came down, did the interview in between the dress rehearsals for the Vancouver Symphony. Literally, it was like this. I show up for the interview, and they're like, they liked my demo. I had reskinned some Mass Effect trailer and redone the sound design, redone the music and the whole bit, enough to get an interview. And the president, Rob Barrett, he loves classical music and all different kinds of music. And he also knew I had a separate career in music and really appreciated that. So I'm in the interview and they're asking me questions, and they're like, okay, so if you had to build a speech system from scratch, how would you go about? And you have to remember, I have zero experience in game development, audio for games. I wouldn't consider myself a gamer. I mean, I played Commodore 64 and the original Nintendo and ColecoVision and that kind of stuff, but I'm not like a hardcore gamer. I'm like, Rat Race and Super Mario were kind of the extent of, or Ninja Gaiden, maybe, at the arcade or something. And so anyways, on the spot, I'm just improvising. I'm like, well, I don't know. I maybe take sentences and splice them up into words and maybe phonemes, and then maybe, database it. And I just riffed off it. And it was enough to be like, I don't have the perfect answer, but they liked the fact that I was thinking outside of the box. And I even said at one point I was like, I don't even really like games, to be honest with you. But I said, I love the challenge. I know it's like the thing never to say, but I was just like kind of a fish out of water.
It's and the most honest version of the job interview question where you go, I guess my biggest fault is I just care too much.
Well, the other thing was, so it was a weird thing, but I was able to basically convince them, I love challenges. I love being creative, and I love stretching myself. And this would be an amazing opportunity, and convinced them enough that they hired me and moved my kids and my wife basically, 3 months later. And then I basically for 5 years I didn't touch any music at all while I worked on,
Tried to build that damn dialogue system.
well, everything. I was like, I was working on the Bigs 2, MLB 2K. I would be flying to Safeco, recording surround sound crowd recordings for like chants and,
Wow.
all this kind of stuff, building a whole arcade baseball game sound palette from the beginning. And so anyways, I did that stuff during the day. And then at nights I was moonlighting and scoring films and TV and doing some, what's the word, ghostwriting for LA writers and on films and TV series and stuff. Because had young kids, had to pay for a couch or pay for other stuff and the day job just wasn't enough. So I would just do that.
I remember when we first met, because you were working at Capcom.
Yeah.
So we'll get to
Yeah.
that next
Yeah.
chapter. But I remember you said that you had done some of that there too, where you were, because I remember asking, how did you ship this through your day job, but then that, and you were like, just, I don't know, clock stops at 5 for one job, it starts for the next kind of thing. And
Pretty much.
it blew me away, just the degree of hustle that implied. I didn't realize it went all the way back. Like, I didn't realize that had started, kind of at the beginning of your time in games.
Yeah, it was insane, to be honest with you. I would say the first 5 years, it was mostly commissions for like choirs and ensembles or artists that I would do. And then I started doing more TV series stuff. I have a Canadian composer called Jeff Toyne.
Yeah, I know Jeff.
Yeah. So I think he spends time in LA as well, but I was helping him with,
I think I met him in New York. I think he was working for Howard Shore.
yeah, he had done a bunch of orchestration for a bunch of different kind of A-list composers as well.
Yeah.
And he did his own. So I was helping him with a bunch of series like Rogue, with Fanny Newton, I think is her name. We did like 3 seasons of that and a bunch of other stuff. But it was crazy because we had 2 young kids and I was working 90, 100-hour weeks, and it was just like, it was crazy. But eventually, after 5 years of that, Inafune-san, the creator of Mega Man from Capcom and Dead Rising, they were looking for a new, a Western development team to make the sequel to Dead Rising. And they reached out to a couple different ones, and one of them was Blue Castle Games. And so the president, remember, who hired me originally, knew I had a life in music, but I was just doing audio at that time. He was like, hey, Inafune-san is coming. We need to do a pitch for this game because we want to do this thing. Can you write a theme suite of music for it? And so I was like, yeah, sure. And I basically went out, did a theme suite, wrote it for it. They came, saw it, looked at the game. They loved it. And he's like, you're in charge of music from now on. And that day, literally, I turned from, audio lead, audio director to main composer and music director. And I kind of, for a decade, basically worked on, I think, 13 or 14 different Dead Rising titles, kind of including main games and DLCs. I even scored like the Sony did a feature film adaptation before it was all the rage. We did a feature film adaptation for Dead Rising for Sparkle, or Sony, I think it was Crackle. That's what it was called.
The online platform that was one of the first to market, really, for original content.
Yeah. So we did that. I worked with Zach Lipovsky, who's doing really well now. He was one of the top 5 contestants on Spielberg's, when he was looking for the next top director in the world.
Oh, yeah.
So he was one of the top 5s. And so we hit it off, and that was fun, and did that for many years. And and then, I even ghosted on some other game projects and other stuff during that time, but because it was one of those things where it was like, I was still killing it at work, like doing lots of stuff, but it was like, you got to we had another kid at that point, and it was just like, I have to like hustle to, put them through school and pay for sports lessons and stuff. So
I totally get it. I find it amazing, as somebody who, I like to work hard. I like the satisfaction of sweat equity, as they call it. And I always, I have great respect for the kind of internal movements within the game industry to be very, very hesitant about anything that might be crunch, or that they're, or also the kind of intrinsic uh, precedents that are set. Like when I talk to friends of mine who run game studios, and they
Yeah.
feel pressure to not work tons of hours because they don't want their employees to think that if they don't mirror the boss's hours. But I also look at it and I go, yeah, but part of the reason why they're the boss, they started a game company, is that they love it to the degree that they want to do it all the time. So of course
Yep.
they're going to want to work 100 hours because it's their project. They have the most to lose if this thing collapses. They lose their whole company plus the reputational damage of costing however many people their jobs, all that kind of stuff. So I said, so I always find it's a nuanced subject, but I definitely am cut from a similar cloth, I think, where it's like, how many hours can you squeeze in? Because this is, of all the things that you can spend 100 hours a week on, this is a great one. Like
Yeah.
it's not working in a coal mine or something where you're destroying your body and all these other things, and it's just like extremely grueling. I'm all for trying to mitigate that kind of work, but this is, the fundamental, this is creative work, this is interfacing with people that are exciting to who challenge you, you get to challenge them, all that sort of thing. So I have a soft spot. It might be a character flaw in the eyes of some or many or all, but I do have a soft spot for this kind of, like, nah, man, I want to, like, I'm at that phase in my life. It's certainly, you were probably what, 20s through your 30s when you were at the max burn like that as well. That's like the right time for it too, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was actually more a little older, so it was more like later, the upper 20s and 30s. Because I'm 47 now. It's funny that you bring that up because it is a nuance. It is a very nuanced thing. So I remember back in the 2010-ish, I remember EA, there was a group we were actually talking about. We had an audio hang with a bunch of audio directors last night in Vancouver, and we were talking about how at EA they had to actually change the culture policy because there was so many divorces happening because
Yeah.
there were EA's bigger because they had thousands of employees, and I think the wives literally took they had some kind of an action suit against EA and they won, and it changed the culture, and EA ended up they did, and they ended up basically changing things in the sense that they managed how much overtime you could work and all this kind of stuff. So there's this one dynamic where it's like you have AAA dev studios of a couple hundred or thousands of people that are working who they have to manage that because it's like they need teams to either service games year after year, and they can't burn people out. Like eventually they'll lose these people and they'll have attrition. On the flip side, like you're saying, then there's creatives like us who are like, this is glorious work because it's like it's creative, get to work with musicians, you're writing stuff for awesome IPs, and it's genuinely motivational and inspiring what you're doing. So it's like I remember when I was doing the album for my cousin, or you doing any like Horizon or other projects, it'd be like when you're in the zone, I could go a whole day without eating. I could forget about what time it is because you're outside of time. Basically, you're not in Chronos. You're kind of in Kairos time, where you're like you're in a flow. You're in a flow. You're not focusing on that because you're in a zone where it's like it's so all consuming, and it has to be because you're on the precipice of like what could be,
Yep.
and it's like you don't want to be pulled out for a moment because just that moment could be enough that like you were holding a golden egg and you it's gone. You don't get it back, right? So.
Yep.
On the flip side, I also have a wife and kids, and I've learned over time that like there's a cost to that too, and you can only sustain it for so long. So for me in my career, I would say, when I was at Capcom, because I knew I had family and responsibilities when I get home, and I also had my second job at night, I was like very like when I'm there, my head is down, and so I wouldn't go and take an hour and a half lunch. I'd be like, I'd come in early. I would just nail through, and I was still delivering like hours and hours of music and stuff for it. But it was just my focus was just when I was there. It was a very how would you say dedicated in a like I'm dedicated to outputting a lot of creative output here in service of the game. And I don't have time to waste on office politics or on or on banter that is just kind of like, I mean, those things are great. It's really good to connect with colleagues and stuff. But usually that's like laughter in between takes, and like you're laughing at yourself or other things like that. But you're really in pursuit of like a higher creative goal. And you surround yourself with people who support that, right? Like you kind of learn not to waste time with people who are going to just complain at work and are just going to like this kind of stuff. You'll be like, you try to surround yourself with like a chamber cast of people that you can rely on, season after season, year after year. And then they're the people who lift you up when you need that extra, boost of energy and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely just nodding along to all of that. Real quick, I want to circle back to when your studio kind of got the gig to work on the Dead Rising
Yeah.
IP. It sounds like when your studio president said, come up with a theme suite. Am I hearing you correctly that wasn't just for you to benefit from
No,
that was almost like helping to demo the studio, like as part of a larger package of here's our vision for this franchise. I mean, it really feels like you were definitely lifting more than your own weight with that. Is that a fair take?
yeah, that's a fair take. Now, that being said, I think other departments had the same, like the art department and the cinematic department and whoever. They were all demoing stuff they had to do, but my music stuff was really its own siloed thing, which is basically, I had a couple of cutscenes that they were demoing that I had to do some stuff on, but I also had to come up with the main theme, all the main character themes,
Right.
defining the sound, basically. And it really, I would say it was the thing that kind of gave it lifted everything up emotionally to a spot where they felt really good. I mean, remember, they came with translators from Japan. A lot of stuff could have been lost in translation. It was a new thing. I know in retrospect, we weren't the only studio they were going to. A lot of times they'll go and they'll get 2 or 3 studios to bid and try, and they'll pick the best one. So did the music carry more weight representing the studio? Maybe. All I do know is that I'm still good friends with Shin Ohara, who was one of the original producers that was on that. He went to Tango Gameworks afterwards. So a lot of these relationships that we formed at that time, they were leaning on us to like wanting to bring it more to the Western audience. And we were looking to them for like, hey, this is like a way to pivot away from arcade baseball to like some other cool genres. So we kind of like, we were leaning on each other in some sense, and it was forged in fire. And in the end, like I said, we have some lasting relationships to this day, and that was back in, 2010 and stuff. So,
right.
Yeah.
So then, walk me through how sort of Capcom became the next chapter.
Yeah. So Capcom, so Dead Rising. So Capcom bought out Blue Castle eventually because they were happy with what Blue Castle did on Dead Rising 2. Basically, we stopped doing sports games for 2K at that time. And then we shifted completely to just working on Capcom IP, Dead Rising. We did Dead Rising 2, Director's Cut off the record, and a bunch of DLCs. And then we went on to Dead Rising 3 and a bunch of its DLCs and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of became like this is the IP. This is what we're known for. It's a zombie horde game. It's like thousands of zombies on screen. The music that I kind of did for the first one was kind of trying to stay loyal to the first game because there's a lot of fans who loved a lot of the music from the original, even the mall music. Like there was a real strong attachment to a lot of these kind of this weird confluence of like survival horror with like kind of like, poking fun at North American kind of, excess.
Right.
And kind of set in the mall. And then my job was to also be like, okay, well, how can I add more life and more excitement? Because I personally I grew up as a kid watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre at sleepovers and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not really a horror junkie. It's not.
Yeah.
So I kind of was like, how can I still thrive in this environment where I get to write music that's very eclectic, but also support like the narrative needs and the story needs of this survival horror, which was kind of a cool challenge, to be honest with you. In hindsight, it was kind of, once you get really good at horror, you get really good at horror and you know what levers to pull and push. But my favorite part, to be honest with you, was all the diegetic music. Like I did hours and hours of stuff, and it was just an excuse to like do all the music that I just normally would do. Like I had a polka band when in high school called the Pickled Beats, which like I love like amazing polka. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to write polka tunes for Dead Rising. I was like, we got mall music. I was going to do that. I did like,
too funny.
I did every kind of genre you can imagine. And then I would also sing and bring in singers and would write tons of different songs, like Barry White songs or like these diva songs with like bar singers and country and like pretty much any genre you could think of. It was just throwing it all at the wall, right?
It's funny because I was going to ask you. So first off, I don't think I realized till you just now said it that with like the working for Capcom was because the studio had gotten acquired. I thought you had like changed. You'd essentially kind of done a pivot that relationship afforded you to pivot. But I realized you were kind of absorbed.
We were.
And that makes way more sense. But that's all an aside. What I was going to say was that what I love, what I was going to ask, and that I love hearing about is that because you had that background in sort of teaching yourself production, I was going to ask you if you had been able to maintain any of that. It's obviously a big part of that initial musical upbringing, and producing bands or anything like that was ever still a part of it. It sounds like you essentially got to do that, on the clock.
I literally had carte blanche. And in fact, what was great was every year I was like, okay, they did like, I don't know, 6 mall music tracks. We're going to do 10. I wrote the main theme for Dead Rising 2. I was just like, we got to make the boss battle tracks way harder, way punchier. So it's like, there's a guy at the studio who was listening to Cell Dweller at the time. This is before Clayton was huge. And so we reached out, licensed a couple of his tracks. I was like, "Hey, Clayton, let's write this title track together." So I wrote the main theme, got him to kind of co-write with me. We brought in the singer from Skinny Puppy, Ogre, to sing on it as well. Like it was a killer track called "Kill the Sound." You can find it on YouTube now. I think Capcom pulled, for some reason, I don't know why, they pulled all the soundtracks because off of Spotify and stuff. But you can still find all the stuff. But it's a great track. But I got to like, I was using these games honestly as an excuse to just like work with any artist that I wanted to, write any style of music that I wanted to, write songs that I wanted to, and like I on Dead Rising 3 I did an Edith Piaf song, like a type of song where I sang in French, pitched my voice up. It's called Je chante pour ma belle, right? So you can also find it on YouTube. We did a Barry White song where I had a audio director of Apex Legends now, Devin Croucher. He was with me at Capcom, and I would basically lay down the framework for a Barry White kind of like song, and we would record it, but then I'd pitch it down and change the format, and it sounds awesome. But it was literally like we were just having a hoot, just literally, because the world was such that my job was to like create this potpourri of musical expression, and also like almost giving players, I felt it was my job to give players, because imagine they're playing a hack and slash zombie game in a mall in the middle of America with like blood spurting all over the screen and zombies. And they either have the music that's playing, which they already knew. I was like, okay, well, what can I do to like almost be like, hey, this is like, when else am I going to be able to play my role as a ethnomusicologist or an educator of like, there's actually a lot of amazing music in the world that you've probably never heard of. And so there would be malls in the store that I'd write tunes for all different parts of the world. And I felt like it was my mission to like, basically just add as much life into this game where there was tons of death, right? And this kind of contrast was like, for me, it was motivating because it kind of helped pull me through the stuff that was, if you're doing year after year after year of dark horror,
Yeah.
it kind of gets to you, right? So I found that this contrast was really something that helped goad me along through the process. But I also did stuff like on Dead Rising 3, some other title tracks and credits and opening credits. I did like a Requiem for the Dead piece, kind of in a Radiohead style. It was a song called Please Remember My Name, which actually got first round Grammy noms back before games had its own category and stuff. So did that kind of stuff. Went on to do Dead Rising 3, Dead Rising 4. Those changed. So Dead Rising 3 was more kind of a post-apocalyptic, grittier setting in fictional LA. So did more of a, more Latino kind of influence and a bit more punk rock. Dead Rising 4, we ended up doing in the Midwest. I think it was in Colorado area or something like that. And so I ended up working with a bunch of musicians in Nashville. We did big band. We recorded in the country of Georgia and did like 3 weeks of recording where we did a
Georgian big band.
Yeah, so like the country like the Soviet country.
Of course, yeah.
We so that project was kind of cool. It
always amazes me when like big band is one of those quintessentially American sort of musical forms, and yet there are pockets of the world where they do it. Like Japan, you think of jazz it's like permeation into the sort of Japanese musical mindset, you know, and you look at like obvious examples like Yoko Kanno or somebody where you're like, this shit is unbelievable. And it is so deeply foreign to them, but yet you would never know it. If anything, there's just pockets of the world where they picked it up and breathed it in on such a level of depth and mastery. But Georgian big band is new to me. That's one I never heard of.
So the thing to remember is there are so many legendary Soviet jazz players and musicians over the years, and Georgia was one of the they have a huge jazz scene out there, and in terms of like the culturally the people themselves, it's like a it's ingrained in them, kind of like, some countries, everybody sings. Right. And they really have, so big band, jazz, different trios and stuff like that. We ended up, basically we did like trios, quartets, full big band, the whole bit. We would do rearrangements. I worked with Robert Elhai,
orchestrator,
famous, amazing Danny Elfman.
Along with Goldenthal.
Yeah, like big guy. And he's an amazing guy. His kid loved Dead Rising. So when I reached out to him, he's like, hey, I need some help with some orchestration for this. Would you like, awesome. Doing some charts? And he's like, yeah, my older son, he think this is cool. Let's do it. And so
I love those kinds of, that's like Hans Zimmer once said that the reason he did The Lion King is because he kept doing all these very adult movies, like Tony Scott movies, and he wanted to be able to bring his kid to the premiere of a movie for once, and like show off as a cool dad. And that's why he did The Lion King. Like, I love that's just as an inroad or like an access point.
It's funny how those things happen, but like we ended up doing a lot of public domain stuff where we would take public domain songs, do new arrangements of them, set for big band or trios or stuff. There's a great jazz new up and coming sax player and singer called Braxton Cook. He's based out of New York. He has his own quartet, I believe. And he had reached out to me, or I had reached out to him. No, he reached out to me on LinkedIn. It was just like, hey, I'm a jazz guy. I'm just finishing up school. I love video games. If there's anything you do. So I listened to this stuff. I'm like, wow, you're really good. So I was like, hey, Braxton, you want to help? Let's get your jazz, ensemble, and let's track a bunch of like Christmas stuff, because this game was set in Christmas. And we did a bunch of Tony Bennett kind of style singing tracks on that. I think we did 20 songs, maybe 30 songs on it. We did a whole Christmas album, actually, part of it. And then that project we also recorded, we spent like 3 weeks recording. We created our own interactive music system at Capcom, where it was kind of like a Shostakovich, Penderecki style horror engine, where it would basically self-score. We recorded like weeks and weeks of
Effects and
aleatoric
stuff.
stuff
Yeah.
and effects and just, but like chugs and stuff, where the system would play back new stuff all the time, but we could change the meter and we could change the timing and the tempo at runtime based on what the user was playing and how many zombies were on screen. And it would be
Amazing.
triggering all these live recordings that we had. But essentially, it was like this horror music machine that was basically just going along. Um, and so, again, it was like just a cool project where it was just like using it as an excuse to try new stuff and, mixing a bunch of funny stuff with a bunch of serious stuff and then with a bunch of songs in between to make it really a lot of fun. So yeah, Capcom was a blast.
It really it's one of those where it never fails to amaze me doing these chats on this show and just in life. We sit down to a lunch with somebody, how sometimes in the most unassuming places you can find a level of depth and artistry and commitment to craft that, on the one hand, I just am in awe of. On the other hand, there's also this poignancy of I hope that players had a semblance of of understanding and gratitude to the level of care that was being given. Because it's one thing if it's The Last of Us
Sure.
or something where from the beginning, first teaser trailer, there's that aura of this is everyone firing on all cylinders. So there's an expectation. In fact, if anything, they've got that working against them where if it's anything other than 10 out of 10, diamond grade, best of the best, it's trashed as though it's crap because the expectations are so high. But there's so many games out there where you take step into it and you realize people are really going all in to ensure that this is a great experience. And what you're describing, you've talked to me about this stuff before, and I knew this to a degree, but you've really kind of blown my mind here in the last few minutes of just the extent that you went to for this.
We did. I kid you not. On the last Dead Rising 4, I think we did 12 hours of music for it. And we're talking like a crazy wide range of stuff, but I'm a maximalist that way. Like I will be
Shit.
like and it's not like I'll be blunt and honest. Like, yes, we need to serve the games, but let's be honest. This is we're spending, like, there's precious time in life. Like I want to make sure that whatever I'm touching and what I'm doing, like there's depth to it. There's richness to it. And it's like life-giving. I'm like, I don't want to be like, I could spread pablum and just copy paste a bunch of the same stuff on the screen, and say the same thing over and over again. But I'm like, why? Well, it'd be better to just have silence, right? So, and some of the times is like, I would rather use this as an excuse to just connect with more musicians. I remember I brought in John, he was the trumpeter that just died last year. He worked with Brian Eno. What was his name? John.
I'm not sure I know.
He worked with blanking. I brought him in on Dead Rising 4 as a composer. John. Sorry, I just gotta find this because John trumpet. He was on Warp Records. Experimental. John Hassel.
I don't know.
Oh, you have to listen to his stuff. He's kind of like a crazy American genius trumpeter. He worked with all the top people, like in film, and he worked with Brian Eno and all these kind of people. Anyways, long story short, I brought him in just because I wanted to work with other people and try stuff. So I just kind of like,
I get that.
I was just like, okay, let's just shove him in. I mean, he was in his like 70s, I think, at the time when I brought him in. But I'm like, hey, let's just find a place to peg him in. I'm like, this guy's contributed so much to the world of music. I'm like, I'm going to find a way. I got a budget. I'm just going to dedicate, not tons, but I'm going to dedicate some time and kind of like make sure that we recognize the amount of contribution that somebody like this has made. Make sure it fits into the actual game so that it works. But I was like, these are games. We got lots of money. There's treasure troves everywhere. We should be totally like mining these troves and like trying to put stuff in rather than, you know, the annoying thing, which is like I find within games, there's so much self-referential work going on where it's like, oh, we want the music like that game. I'm like, really? Like, you're not thinking of like architecture from the last thousands of years, or you're not thinking of like music that's not synced to media. Like, does it have to be this movie, which reference this movie, which reference this movie? Does every
Preaching to
single
the
key
choir,
art,
man.
yeah, right? And what does every key art poster have to have that color palette again? You
Yeah,
know?
you sound like John Powell, who, when he does a lot of Q&As, and they'll say, what is your recurring advice for young composers, and he says, listen to something other than fucking soundtrack albums, is something that he often
Yeah,
says. Now I'm always a little bit easier on that one, where I say someone like John Powell or Ludwig Göransson or Dan Pemberton, or a
yeah,
handful of others are very worth listening to, but in part because they beautifully synthesize this eclectic blend of
yeah.
influences,
They
and
curate.
and
They curate beautifully, right? So
yeah, exactly, and they clearly are not just trying to sound like the next Hans Zimmer or John Williams or whomever, but they listen to a lot of stuff. Like Dan Pemberton and I were talking about. He worked on the Harley Quinn movie with Margot Robbie, and he was saying how like there was a very specific type of guitar playing from Rage Against the Machine that was like
mm,
very influential for how he was approaching a certain aspect of that score. And it's one of those where if you just never got out of that silo, you would not appreciate the wide range in which other people make music in the world. So
absolutely.
supremely preaching to the choir there.
But
Uh,
to but just coming back to your point about like the amount of energy that people put in, that
mm-hmm.
do the gamers know the amount of work that we put in? Probably not. And I mean, there's lots of people that do stuff in the world that never goes noticed, and lots of silent like contributions that people have made where we benefit off of it and we take it for granted. That being said, I wasn't doing it for other people, right? Like this was, I was, as my job was to do it, but ultimately I was like, what is feeding my soul and what is feeding me energy throughout this process? I'm like, you know, there's a reason why we're always chasing like that amazing sonic world. There's a reason why we're spending so much time on the last 5% of a mix or
Mm.
the last 5% of an orchestration, just to make sure that everything is perfectly balanced. Because it's like, once it's done, we know we're not coming back to it. It's like we're moving on. And so if this is something, and I think our goal a lot of the times is, at least one of my goals is, I like to try to create music which eventually is timeless, ultimately that is something which can stick around. And whether it's like, like the Guardians of the Galaxy and it's in your Walkman for another 20 years, or whether it's like the next generation or 100 years from now, but I want to create stuff which has some DNA and some kernels in it that are like worth sharing again, right? So did the Dead Rising players recognize the depth of the music that was there 15 years ago? Probably not. I've had some others who are like, I got some notes on social media from a couple of people that are like, I was going through a really dark time in my life, and
Mm.
this Mall Muzak track saved me. I was like, what? What? A hack and slash Mall Muzak track? But to your point, it was like, for whatever reason, if you put everything that you can into what you're doing, and you're kind of trying to be attuned, kind of like we try to tune with musicians, with instruments, with each other to resonate, so that there's this buildup of energy which just multiplies exponentially. In the same way, you don't know how, as long as that you're doing that and that you're like committed to the craft and to the purity of trying to pursue something as deeply and as richly as you can, then like I said, even in Mall Muzak, in a hack and slash, horror survival game, somebody is going to sense something in it, that might feed them that you weren't expecting and stuff. And I think that's the reason why, as modern composers working in media that have a really wide range of reach, I think it's something that we really have to, take stock of like the impact that what we do has on people. If we
Oh
if we
yeah.
if we sow like more destructive stuff, or if we cheapen out on our approach to something, it's like you literally just wasted somebody's 5 minutes of their life that they will never get back to again with stuff that is substandard. And it's like, if I think of the timeless stuff, the art, the poetry, the film, anything that is like worth, that feeds us as human beings, whether it's architecture that we walk through in space, or whether it's like paintings or thoughts or archetypes, it's all these things which there's forms which are life-giving, and the ones which are destructive, you sense it, right? Like you sit through something, you're like, this either doesn't do something for you or it actually affects you in a negative way. And so I personally take that really seriously, in the sense of there's like an onus on us as artists to understand the weight of what we put out into the world. Now, in games, it's a popular form, art form, and entertainment form, which, a lot of it is artifice and veneer. But I do feel that people sense what's below the surface, and they do sense kind of the richness or the DNA that is underneath there. And so that's why I think we have to be really careful of how we construct it and how we think about it.
I could not agree more. I think another way to frame that would be, if you treat it as pure artifice and veneer, then anybody who crosses paths with it, who might be needing something in their life more meaningful, will
Yeah.
not get it from that thing that you made.
Yeah.
But even if one out of 10,000 people who might play the game actually
It's worth it.
crosses paths with it at that moment where they need something that is more substantive
Yeah.
or made with that much care and love, that will hit them, or at least it stands a chance.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with that. And I think that's a great way you summarized it, because, in a game like Horizon, I've had a lot of people reach out to me about how much a lot of the music has impacted them emotionally, but not just emotion just for the sake of emotion, but it actually tied to like, again, there's an undercurrent there which resonates with them, and either their suffering that they're going through or whatever it is. And one's a little different. That one's a little different because the narrative and the work, the world that the kind of the main characters are going through already lends itself to that. But I think it shows us that, music is very powerful as universal language, and it's an energy form which you have to be careful how you wield it, right?
Well said. That's a great segue, because obviously I really want to talk about Horizon. Um, I'm still working my way through we've had the flight on here,
All
and
right, go and that's nice.
haven't made it to Yoris yet, but I really I loved the first score a lot,
Mm.
and then when the second one came out, I remember at the time I had been in this minor, totally inconsequential car accident, but consequential insofar as, like, I always frame it like, because I don't want to even plant the seed that there were no injuries on anyone's part, but it was just one of those hit just right that my car had to be junked, even though I barely even felt the impact. It just was one of those really unlucky things. But my studio is not that far from home, and it was the middle of the pandemic. Everything had switched to Zoom, and so I was like, or it was actually, where was it relative to the pandemic? It might have been right before the pandemic, actually. But whatever it was, I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something very anti-LA, and I'm just going to not get another car. And I went a little
Your
over.
bike, right?
Yeah, I rode my bike for about a year. I went and bought a bike. I didn't even own a bike. I went and bought a bike and thought, I'm going to ride my bike to the studio. And I was able to hold that up before I finally caved and bought a car that now I flip back and forth between the two. But
Nice.
I went over a year, like 14 months, something like that, of solely relying on a bike in LA.
Wow.
Super novel way to live in LA. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And one of the things that I loved about it is I found myself listening to way more audiobooks than normal and way more music than normal, because we can't write music and
Sure.
listen to music at the same time, the way a lot of people listen while they're at work or while they're doing stuff. I can't even have music on in the car while I'm trying to talk to somebody. I just cannot multitask with music on. My
Sure.
focus goes entirely onto the music. It's really hard for me. I don't like it if I'm at a concert, someone whispers in my ear, because then I lose both. I lose the music and I can't really understand what they're
Yeah.
saying. So I found that it was so nice to just be in this meditative bike riding space. I got headphones on. I got some pretty nice ones that were nicely compatible with riding a bike. And so it was one of those delightful things that Horizon comes out. I remember I'd loved the the sort of magical blend of that sort of fun futurism synth,
Yeah.
not really synth wave, but taking that whole sort of notion, pushing it somewhere novel, and then mashing it up with this kind of interesting sort of tribal, like sort of pre-civilization sense of primal kind of percussion. And I'd really liked how that came together in the first one, and some really interesting, just beautiful Julie's vocals, and there was just a lot that I really loved about it. And
Yeah.
so it was a wonderful surprise when I remember saying this to you at the time, but I'm reiterating it for the sake of our listeners, that I would be riding my bike and I'd have like Spotify in my pocket. And so I have no like way to know what I'm listening to. I remember it came out, and I always like to see what my friends and colleagues are up to. So I'll listen to a bit of it. That one was
Yeah.
intimidating because it's a 75-hour album, but it happened like 6 times in a row. I'd be riding along and I'd be like, fuck, this is great. This is great. Even in the context of a score I love. Time and again, get out my phone, check, and it was one of yours. And I just thought, God damn, like what a wonderful voice. And I like all of it. That is not to the disparagement of the other composers involved. But you really brought something that sparkled, man. It crackled, to use the same pivot you did earlier. It really there was something fresh, both in the beautiful, like obviously the kind of single, if you want to call it, in the flood, some gorgeous writing, but even the kind of combat-y, just go fucking savage. It was interesting. I mean, it was really, I was listening going, the kind of polymetric, keep me on my toes. I never quite know where one is going to land.
Right.
It was great stuff, man. So how did you end up, just walk me through your Horizon experience? This is Horizon Forbidden West, for those who I realized we didn't specify on the sequel. How did that come to be? And walk me through your experience of slotting in, because it's always challenging to join an IP that's set, especially one that has a pretty strong sense of identity that this one did, in the best sense.
No, well, first of all, thank you. It means a lot coming from you, so I appreciate that. And I remember back when you shared that stuff, that was really, really encouraging. Well, first of all, we had a killer music team. I mean, Alexis and Joe, The Flight, Joris, and Niels van der Leest, and Lucas was our music supervisor as well on that. So they already had established a really solid sound from Zero Dawn. I had, so where it all started was I was at Capcom, and my oldest son at that time, he was younger, but he was Take Your Kid to Work Day. And I brought him. And so part of that Take Your Kid to Work Day was just like, hey, show them what you do. And then at one point there was a break in between. I was like, hey, let's go. There's this place where we play our peers' games and we just, review it together. And I'd never heard of or played Horizon Zero Dawn. And it was there. I was like, sure, let's just plug it in. And then put it in, and I was just like, I heard Joris's music for the opening scene. I was like, this is really beautiful. I was like, and you have to remember, this was after being at Capcom for like almost a decade. And I'm like, I have this whole other side of my life that people have not heard, the beautiful music that I do. I'll do a lot of sacred choral music, a lot of chamber writing and this kind of stuff. I was just like, and I heard this, I was like, the light bulb just went on. I was just like, I gotta get writing stuff that's closer to my wheelhouse. As fun as the Capcom stuff was, I was just like, I gotta write some beautiful stuff. And so anyways, long story short, one of the audio producers that we had at Capcom left. He ended up going and joining the Gorilla team. So this was like maybe 9 months after this Take Your Kid to Work day. And I reached out to him just like, hey, I see that you're at Gorilla. I watched this, listened to this stuff. I think it's beautiful. I don't know if they're working on anything else next, but I'd love a chance to like pitch or just see something going on. Many months goes by. I get a email from him. He's just like, yeah, we've gone through rounds and rounds of composers because we were trying to find somebody to slot in to fit in with the original team. And they're like, do you want to do a pitch? I was like, yeah, sure. So anyways, long story short, did the pitch for it. They had 2 pieces I had to do. I did like an underwater thing, and they were like, write a new theme basically, like for a sequel basically. And yeah, they loved it, hit it off, and then basically
I assume they were, because there's already multiple composers. Was it just the notion of scope and timeline and just feeling like there's just so much to do?
There was scope, but also it was much more ambitious in terms of the amount of emotional writing that they wanted. They basically wanted to really lean into the emotion of Aloy, the main character, because the fans really resonated with her and her story and her story arc. Sure. And there was just hours and hours of music to write, and they were like, Joris was really the only one who was really doing that kind of melodic harmonic development. Right. And they were like, we need somebody else to come in and essentially help do the equivalent or more for the next one, because there's lots of cinematics and there's lots of this development. So for whatever reason, they thought I was a great fit, and so then they flew me to Amsterdam. I met the whole team, did the whole sniff test with Joe and Alexis and Joris and Niels, and we all got along. It was cool, a great team. And then it was just, we basically just started. So what that did was I left Capcom actually in, I think it was August or September, because my goal was eventually, I was like, okay, I can't do another decade here. There's so many other types of games and films and projects that I want to do. And I can't, if I'm in-house as an in-house composer and music director, I can't do this kind of stuff. So I had an exit plan already, and basically Horizon was my ticket to get out, basically. And so I got the gig, quit, started my own company with a colleague called Interleave. And at that time, there was about 4 of us. We were doing audio and music and tech for video game, AAA games and stuff like that. And so that kind of Horizon was my main gig that I would work on, and then I'd be developing the business at the same time during that. And so for those 4 years, worked there, did Horizon, went to Amsterdam, came back, did that kind of stuff, and kind of went through that 4 years. And then now, Horizon released, did the DLC Burning Shores for it as well. And then in the meantime, built a company, and now we have about 20 full-time people working for our team. So we have a music team with like 3 or 4 composers, music producer and supervisor. And then we have a audio team of like amazing sound designers. And then we have a tech team of like software engineers, tech artists and stuff that are building like all the audio and music systems for like big triple quad A games and stuff. So, and we're actually developing some of our own IP and music-based stuff as well. So it's kind of cool. In the same way that at Capcom, I was a maximalist and wanted to really go deep and wide. This ability to like because I'm the creative director for the company and a co-founder. So then it allows me to like do projects like a Horizon, where people that like my voice and recognize my musical voice, I can work on these bigger kind of projects. But then kind of putting on the creative director hat, I'm also doing a lot of mentorship. I'm doing a lot of outreach and kind of contributing to the next generation of composers, and the kind of, because I was an audio director for many years at Capcom as well. It wasn't just music. So I have a really good ear and really good kind of talent and understanding how there's this confluence of really challenging technical challenges that you have, plus creative challenges, and being a catalyst and trying to like work with game directors and film directors. And like, we do a lot of work even with Netflix and Disney, where we do on-set music direction for like big musicals. And so like, it's just another melange of a bunch of interesting things. And it's about really important relationships with like some world-class creatives, working with people that you want to work with, expanding that world to hear the musical voices and the artistic voices of people that we feel should be celebrated, and their musicianship or their voices should be coming out. and then marrying that with also this technical side, which I had, you know, I never would have experienced had I not worked in house at a development studio. You know, learning how to speak to a software engineer, learning how to speak to a technical director, learning how to speak to business people who are on the publishing side who have completely different challenges, but they have also creative challenges. And you know, there's so I end up building bridges between all these different people, the executives where you need to upward manage, and then the people who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting of the actual dev work, they have to downwards manage. And then there's this kind of sphere of audio directors, music directors, art leads and stuff like that, who are like the people who are responsible for the pillar of games and understand that their job is to basically come together as a tribe and a team that are going to like execute on this creative vision that they want to release in a couple of years. So I'm in a position where I get to like still write music, but I'm able to interface and really contribute meaningfully to people that are operating at these different levels throughout the development cycle. So it's very rewarding. I would say realistically, I'm spending too much time on the business side and less time in creative, but I'm making changes now where I'm like, I only do meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays is nothing but creative. I do nothing else. And my hope is in the next year or two that I can get back to just all I'm doing is either writing my own stuff, helping catalyze creative things, conversations, mentor, that kind of stuff. And then we have some ambitious projects, and I have some personal projects that I also want to develop. So it's you know, when you have your own business, your own team, sometimes you just gotta, you're the buck stops with you, so you have to put in the time. But my hope is that as I, you know, in the next couple of years, I can transition back to just pure creativity and stuff. So.
No, well, I'm so I was gonna tee up to ask about it earlier. I'm so happy that it sort of naturally went there because it's extremely impressive. I mean, the growth of it. When you first told me about it, I was blown away that it had already kind of made it to a scale that it was, because it's not a small thing. You know, when I talk to folks and they are like, "Oh, I run a game studio and there's 30 of us. We're very small." I think just because the Naughty Dogs out there or the Sony Santa Monica's or the Larians or whomever make 30 look small, or Ubisoft, you know, where it's like 15,000. To have your decisions impact the salaries, the livelihoods, the fiscal viability of even just one other person is a truly massive responsibility. It's very much a cousin of what you were saying before, of there's almost a sacredness to when someone is entrusting their finite hours of their life to your thing that you put out there, whether it's a piece of music you wrote or a video game you've participated in. That shouldn't be taken overly lightly. And obviously someone deciding I'm looking for work. You need a sound designer. I do sound design. Okay, let's do it. It's not just a convenience. You really, there's a burden of responsibility there. And you're the kind of guy with the integrity and just the mindset that clearly is not lost on you at all. But it comes through even just in everything that you say. I think it's lovely, and I'm really glad that it sort of is a thing we could talk about here as well, because it's a wonderful thing, I think, for others, especially any composers who would listen to this later, to just, I love that all the different paths that a composer's life can take are kind of gradually illuminated through the course of this podcast and all the different conversations that I've had. But yours is pretty distinct, even among the natural diversity that emerges just by virtue of different career paths, because that really is a bit of a different course, and it's fascinating. It's very cool to hear about.
I think, you know, if we're talking about other composers who listen to the podcast, I would say that would be my one. I try not to give advice unless I'm asked about it, but that would be kind of riffing off what you're talking about is, you know, in my own career path, it was the fact that I put in 5 years of working on stuff that I had no clue what I was doing, but I was willing to put in the 100 hours a week to make it happen, in service of, they took a risk on me when I said, I don't like games, but yeah, let's try this, right? And then that relationship was like, okay, we're locked. We're gonna do something here. and you give without expecting anything in return, right? Like I remember, I think it was Trolls from 8DO said this.
Uh-huh.
At one point, somebody had asked him something, but he basically was something to the effect of like, when you're in your 20s and even in your 30s, like just say yes to everything and don't expect anything in return. Do whatever you can to help somebody bring their vision to life as best as you can. And because what you end up doing is now there's cases where that can be taken advantage of, and there's obviously clearly cases of composers, big composers, taking advantage of people and not giving credit where credit was due. And
Sure.
but let's assume that it's not that and it's benign, but it's just more of like, I think it's a healthy thing for you as a somebody who wants to pursue a life that's creative. If you see it as like you said, a sacred task or some kind of a thing where your job and your role is like, okay, there's only one of you. There's no other people like you in the world, right? There's no other snowflake that's the same. It's the same thing with us. It's like, we're all snowflakes that are unique, right? So, but in a sense, like, can you harness all of your energy and everything that is unique about you, but not to just serve you and your own motives? Can you do it in a way when you're starting out where you can channel that and help somebody, flesh out their world? Or if it's not a person and it's an indie dev studio, can you pour everything into it and be like that trusted person that they know that they want to be in the fire with, basically? Because that's where you create those bonds that last for years and years and decades even, is because you're like, I don't exactly know how I'm going to solve this creative problem or this technical problem, but I'm committed to it and we're going to make it through it. And they remember looking at you being like, we had no clue what the heck we were doing here, but we got out on the other side. We released a project, and they remember that. And that's what binds you together. And it also keeps you in good stead for the future, because I feel like if you expect nothing in return, but you just commit to excellence and you commit to like real integrity in like trying to deepen your craft, trying to deepen your relationships that are like real, when it happens, you're not in control of, but I guarantee you it's going to happen at some point, and it's going to be an exponential curve. Like, for me, it happened to be that Horizon was that point which allowed me to have this, but it took like 2 decades to get to that place of like, the reason that like the music team from Zero Dawn trusted me with their stuff and their sound was because I just learned to flex this muscle of like, hey, how can I be a great partner? How can I help make this something that's special, which doesn't devalue what you've already contributed, but also recognizes that I have something unique with my voice to contribute, to add to it. And I couldn't have done that and couldn't have had them feel secure had I not flexed that muscle in all those 2 decades before of practicing that. So that would be probably the biggest thing I would suggest. Like, of course, do your training, get good at your production and all that kind of stuff. But like, I think just that desire to want to go deep and wide and to offer yourself to other people and to kind of be willing to do whatever needs to be done to help people, the return on investment is just, it's immeasurable, what it does for you as a person, but also creatively, because you're always expanding in that way, right? You're always looking for connections. You're always thinking, how can I help this person? And then you hear from somebody, oh, well, this person said this and they tried this. And all of a sudden you become this link that for them,
100%.
and you're in some ways, you're kind of teaching them like to pattern how they will treat their employees or how they will treat other people that they interface with, right? So it's a win-win. It's not a zero-sum game. It's like very much like a win-win. And at some point, it just takes off exponentially. So
I cannot fathom a better note to end this chat on than that, man. That was a fantastic kind of tirade
sorry,
on
yeah, it's a little verbose, but
not at all, dude. I intentionally just at some point I realized you're bringing the ship into port so beautifully. I'm just going to let you run with it rather than kind of riff on it with you or pick it apart, because that was fantastic. I mean, that was really at minimum I'm in deep agreement with you. If not, that's just great advice objectively,
Well,
because I love
I
it.
think it's something that you do also, right? Like I commend you on that. It's like, you know, not that we're handing over the baton, but we're not spring chickens either, right? Like at a certain point, there has to be like an outward look to the next generation of
Yeah,
creatives, right?
I look at it as the most succinct way to describe the kind of underlying philosophy below all of it, kind of bedrock first principles for me, with a specific regard to the game industry. Part of the reason why I do this podcast or the stuff I put on YouTube or going to events and things like that
Yeah,
is to hopefully leave the game industry in some marginal way better than I found it. And even
yeah,
if that's a fraction of a percent movement, the goal is to have a net positive contribution. And because in part I play games, I'm a massive game lover. I play games every single day of the week,
yeah.
whether for a minute or for an hour. I love talking about them. I love thinking about them. I love working with players. And so you could argue it's a selfish instinct to say, what can I do that
To
will
make sure,
yield better
you know,
games? You know,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and because that sometimes manifests as someone will approach me and say, are you interested in pitching on this game? And then, conversation leads to another where I actually think you would be better off going with X. And as
mm,
much as I would love to be part of it, um, the net goal is what's the best version of the game industry. And if I think you're going to gel with this other person better than me, if I don't feel like I'm necessarily the great fit for you, it's in violation of the deeper principle to
yeah.
go, well, I value having a job now more than this bigger goal of a better game industry. But the truth is, I think that you'll make a better game with somebody else than with me in this particular instance for XYZ reason. And of course, sometimes you have to really, it's a real test, where you're like,
Yeah.
I really do want that job though, but I can feel that I'm not the right fit. And there's time, and I've probably failed in that test sometimes in terms of like personal integrity test. But yeah, so
But
that's where, yeah, everything you're saying, man, I just so resonate with.
to your point, like when you're your best version of yourself and you're like, no, actually this is better suited for somebody else. It takes security and guts to make that kind of a call. But again, the ripple effect is that you've now patterned something for somebody else to be like, oh, so there is a better way to do this.
Yeah.
There is a better way to treat people. There is a better way to like not look at every composer as a threat. It's like
Oh,
what a
dude, I
what a
don't.
waste of energy, right? Like
One of the best stories that I ever have come across that I was very happy to, make sure got recorded for posterity on this podcast was when Gordy Hab was up for his first real time at bat on a Star Wars game. Like he had been, he had helped out as part of the broader LucasArts team on like the Old
yeah,
Republic and stuff. But I think it was on Star Wars Battlefront where he was, in a position to really pitch for it as the composer. And they didn't know him. Chance Thomas was also up for it. And
no,
and he said, you guys should really listen to Gordy's music. And he, even in the midst of his own demo process, he
amazing.
advocated for Gordy. And Gordy said he got on authority from the audio director that is what made them like go sifting through the mountain of reels and really give him a shot. And I mean, look what has come out of that. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a decade of
Well,
the
I think
highest level.
and I think both of you guys made it on Grammy noms this year, right?
Yes, we are in friendly, spirited competition with one another. And yeah, and I told him I'm all too happy to lose to him, and maybe by the time this airs, I will have already lost to him if that's the case, and all well earned to me, because that's like that at this point in my mind. It's not just really for that score; it's really like the body of work as well, because
Yep.
the Star Wars, what he and Steven in particular on those two games, but he more broadly in Battlefront and
Yeah.
Squadrons and so many others, brought a level of class of orchestral writing that's just that John Williams level of craftsmanship It's not a lot of folks can hit that mark. I mean, it's that specific, that very traditional romantic capital R treatment of the orchestra. Very
Yeah.
few things even call for that. And those that do, not a lot of people have just the baseline ability to write on that level. It is a very specific thing. And they really do have that. And it's astounding. And I love that there's games out there, credit to Steve Schnurr and EA for going, we like that. Sign us up for 30 hours of it
Yeah.
over the next decade. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I was just talking yesterday. Actually, I had a chat with Colin Andrew Grant, who did the music implementation for the Star Wars game, and we were talking through a bunch of this stuff. And again, it's like this hyper dedication to a world class level of output. And it's do the players? Does every player notice it or recognize it? Probably not. But that like, what's your option? Do you give like second best? Or do you just give your best? And I think that's in the nutshell, that's, don't be insecure, give your very best and serve those around you. You'll be good, right? You'll get your gigs eventually. It might take you 10 years, might take you 15 years, but whatever. Like you'll at least have done it in a way where you've actually the net gain of like changing the world around you and particularly within the games industry will be much better. Kind of like you're saying, like if I can leave the game industry a bit better, I guarantee you if more people like practice that, it'll be much, much better.
Preach, man. Let's call it there. I can't thank you enough for giving me so much time on one of your non-meeting days. And,
no, I call this is creativity, so it's all good.
It's great. I love it. Well, it feels the same for me, man. It's always the best of these always make me walk away afterward feeling just fired up and full of juice, and you've absolutely done that for me today. I freaking love this. So thanks so much, dude. And hopefully, it won't be a year to the day since I see you in person again.
Absolutely. We'll be hanging out soon.
Make a point of it. All right, dude. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. All right. Take care.